many people who will be hugely affected, and some people say in the Amazon who will not be affected at all. But in the main, the majority of the populace of the planet will be affected by this deepening depression. And it is actually not really a depression as so much as, say, birth pangs or a quickening into something entirely new, which I don't know that we have actually invented just yet. In any event, the seriousness of the economic situation will be very acute from July 14th onward. I think that this may relate to a massive crop failure and or the radiation issues and or the weather changes, which is to say some exogenic forces to the paper debt economic system will intrude in mid-July that will push more pressure on the whole of the situation and break it out into the open in such a way as to have undeniability be a watchword for the collapse of the dollar, such that by the time we get into November, many people on the planet at the level of the regular fellow working in his job will be wondering if the dollar will survive. A very key change. End of statement.
Hi, Cliff. I'm Julie, and first of all, I'd like to thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. It's greatly appreciated. My question is, I experienced some very strange things coming overseas this time that I'd never experienced before, security-wise. And I was curious to know what type of difficulties are coming in the near future for travel in and out of the States, and also just movement in general, mainly in the United States, but also in other areas around the planet. And how difficult will it be to become mobile and have the ability to go from point A to point B without hindrance? Over.
Hello. I'm sorry you've experienced the problems in travel. These are to be expected. They come from within the metadata layer that we have a dual name for. It's called restriction on movement, but it also has another side called encounters with scarcity. And both of these are going to affect travel over the near term. But there's also another component, which is the minion class previously spoken of, is desperately seeking ways to remain in power, even as they are noting that their masters, the powers that be, know that components of their plan have failed, and thus things are in a state of stress that they had not anticipated. We can expect that the powers that be and their minion class will attempt to restrict movement in increasing amounts over time, especially these next 2 years. The end of the next 2 years, say 2010 into 2011, will be quite chaotic. Depending on a number of variables that will occur this year relative to the transformation, we might, and I emphasize that word, might, see the total isolation of the U.S. by external forces in early 2011. Or we might see a corollary to that, which is a form of self-isolation as we here in the U.S. work our problems out during that period of time. And in either case, both of those will impact the ability to move around within the U.S. itself. However, there are exogenic events pending which are planetary or solar system or universal wide, and they will impact humanity in ways that our data, while it's hinting at it, is not yet fully predicting. One of these might be the global coastal event, which may, for instance, do away with some portion of the ability to ship goods and people on the ocean. We may also find, however, that there are severe restrictions on airplane travel, not only due to a scarcity of resources, but also due to increasing levels of radiation at high altitude. Bear in mind that the UV radiation is just a subset of the totality of energies from space, which include energies that we are not yet aware. So we may see instances of the powers that be still attempting at some level to keep the air travel industry alive, but at the same time, actual physical damage from people flying in episodes of high radiation. It will only take one or two of those before a lot of the impetus to fly will be removed. There are many other influences to this, and some of which we'll get into in parts 3 and 4 of the current series. End of statement.
Thank you, Cliff. This is Michael again. I'm asking another question now following on to this. In a discussion that we have had for a while now, that's an on and off discussion that comes always back, and the key word is to live above 65 degrees north. Could you talk to this issue a little bit, what your feelings are, what you know about it, or whatever comes to your mind? Over.
Yes, Michael. This is a very key issue. I am above 40 degrees north, which is a marginal position. The powers that be certainly have provided evidence that they believe that whatever has them afraid may not impact anything above 60 degrees. We have several key components of evidence of this, including the seed vault, but also the position of HAARP, woodpecker, and a few of the other installations that they have going. So there is some evidence and inference that can be derived that indeed above 60 may present a survivable position within the northern hemisphere. The alternative is to understand that below the equator we may find larger areas that will be unaffected by whatever it is that the powers that be fear. We have Paul Love-Willette saying that the galactic superwave and the solar explosion kind of thing would be northern hemisphere effective more than southern hemisphere effective. And this seems to match the powers that be in terms of how they are acting. That is to say, deep underground to avoid radiation, but also shifting large masses of things north of 60 degrees. This is because they believe the angle of incidence would cause any level of radiation to be minimally effective at that level. And there are some strange things going on with the powers that be relative to the far north of both Russia and Canada. So there is more support than just mere inference. There's actual data points for it. But there's another component to this that is not discussed, and that is the issue of any kind of a crustal shift of the planet. We have to acknowledge that on the equator, the height of the water in the oceans is 13 miles higher than it is at either pole. If we have a crustal shift, the evidence is that no crustal shift in the past has been less than 30 degrees in distance. This is from Hapgood and also Hancock's research. If that's the case, then some significant portion of the planet will have to transfer itself across the equatorial bulge, including that part of the oceans. And so this may negate any supposed safety at any level of the planet, because I would believe such effects to be unpredictable. There is some small amount of evidence that the powers that be are aware of the potential for a crustal shift and its impact, and yet they still believe that above 60 north would be preserved even under those circumstances. End of statement.
Hello, Cliff. This is just coming to me instinctually. One of the things I wanted to ask about is the role of these two time travelers that you spoke about in your on the website. The other thing is if there's anything that you could say about the new physics and how that impacts on the way in which this whole thing is panning out. Thank you.
Yes, actually they're not time travelers per se. They're self-described as thieves or liberators. We get a lot of information about the two personalities, oddly enough. Why they should be, I don't know, except that they apparently are very archetypical. They will have a very large effect on the spread of the knowledge of the fundamental breakthrough that's occurring now relative to when their visibility rises in November. A lot of things are going to happen in November. The liberators of this technology are not necessarily key to this new physical understanding of things, but it is a curiosity, which we should really divert to note that the powers that be are very upset by the countercultural, to use an old word, shift in understanding about physics, quantum physics, equal consciousness field et al. The powers that be have a very large level of disturbance around this, and they are afraid of its impact as it spreads, such that they have a fear or target date of March of 2010. They suspect that there will be some level of disturbance to their power base as a result of this knowledge alone, and at some point within their structure, they've anticipated that a breakthrough or a bulge in understanding would reach a tipping point as of March of 2010. The new physics in relation to the planetary changes, we do not have a conjunction of those two data sets. It's very difficult for us to do such a conjunction because the size of the Terra entity is massively overwhelming in terms of the lexicon versus these much smaller, much more defined sets of the new physics, consciousness field et al. So when we would do a conjunction of those, it would be virtually impossible for us to find the new physics impacting. Now, if that situation were to change in reality such that there would be some discussion about it within the press, as in the idea of a giant headline, so-and-so saved us from meteor with new physic device, or a fellow creates a new anti-gravity device that fits in the palm of your hand. Those kind of things will cause a bubble within our data prior to their occurrence, but we don't yet see any of that. We also need to acknowledge, though, that the chaos that will appear in 2010 and 2011 globally seems to be already predicted to impact both the mainstream media and the dissemination of knowledge across the Internet. And this may be due to physical disruption, or such as a solar flare or something, but certainly will be impacted by the social chaos and the resource problems that will arise. We see that there will be electricity issues in 2010 and 2011 that will affect server farms and thus affect the Internet. End of statement.
Hello, Cliff. This is Roman again. This morning we developed around the topic of consciousness, space and time, a new formula, which we partly regard as the first formula of the new mathematics. And one element of looking at this topic as it came up in this fresh moment, we realized that if we further the consciousness factor, the more we further the consciousness factor, the less space the space-time factor dictates upon us. And so we were wondering if we really worked on this, not only in this group, but worldwide, if we could